Polytetrafluoroethylene is a real word in the real world and is really important to my Skyblock playthrough for some reason. You see, I'm stranded here, and the path to escape is full of realistic chemistry, which is very confusing for my chemically imbalanced brain. But there is a machine that can not only make realistic chemistry more simple, but also less expensive. But in order to make it, I need polytetrafluoroethylene. And I'll tell you a secret. PTFE is a chemical, so in order to overcome the realistic chemistry, I must master it. But it won't be my only obstacle. We'll need to advance well into the high voltage tier of technology to produce PTFE, so I better get to... First, I'd really like a better power source, and thankfully the OG of Minecraft returns in a big way. Diamonds can be turned into nearly 500,000 FE, and we have an easy and consistent way to make an infinite amount of them using the kinetic sieve multi-block. It's cheap, but a really time-consuming process to make all the treated wood components for it, but it is really cool looking, though we still need to fuel it with tons of sand. And here comes my favorite cobblestone generator, the Igneous Extruder, a one-block superhero of cobblestone. Just place it between water and lava, and it makes cobblestone forever, but it's a bit slow in its basic form, so thankfully we can make an MV upgrade kit to make the guy run 16 times faster than normal, which is probably more cobblestone than we're gonna need. And with a little bit of storage drawer magics, we've got sand infinitely flowing into the sieve, where diamonds, lapis, emeralds, and quartz infinitely flows out. With a lapidary dynamo, we can burn our diamonds into millions and millions of power, and fueled by an MV upgrade kit will produce 3200 FE per tick. Not as fast as our current generation, but way more space efficient, fuel efficient, and scalable. And you know, while we're at upgrading our power generation, let's upgrade our power cables. No more Create mod wires. We're upgrading to Ender IO conduits, which will transfer way more power. And now, it's as Uncle Ben once said, with great power comes even better electric furnaces. So I set out to upgrade our coils from Canthal to nichrome. Not strictly needed for any recipes, but the hotter the EBF, the faster it smelts, and we'll be needing to smelt copious amounts of metals going forward. Nichrome is actually a really simple blend of nickel and chromium, all of which we have plenty of, but it does take a while to smelt down, so it's time to immerse ourselves in the art of Gregtech multitasking. The high voltage casing metal is stainless steel, a blend of iron, steel, chromium, and manganese, and the wire is lumium, an easier blend of glowstone, tin, and silver. We're able to process or achieve all of those resources, but we'll not only need to mix up enough of those blends, but make sure they're smelting in an EBF alongside our nichrome. So now that we're waiting on 3 different ingots to smelt, we may as well make some strides toward high voltage circuitry by engraving and cutting silicon boules into the necessary RAM, wafers, and chips. Even after that, we're still waiting on smelting, so let's automate something else. I'd really like to have infinite redstone since it's fairly useful, so we can use another kinetic sieve, but I don't want to wait an hour for the components to craft again, so I'll make an MV extruder, a machine that can make things like gears and rotors directly from ingots instead of this nightmare. And of course, as always, whilst Gregtech multitasking, here's where things go wrong. While working on the sieve, I go to cool or hot nichrome ingots, only to realize in abject horror that they can't be cooled in a simple chemical bath. I'll need a vacuum freezer, which requires extreme voltage circuits that require a load of high voltage technology, and worst of all, the clean room. I hate the clean room, but we've already worked so hard to get this far. I mean, we're nearly at nichrome coils. Am I really gonna give up just because? Yes, I hate the clean room and we're not doing it, so I stop smelting my nichrome and move on with getting our redstone and sulfur automated from another big old sieve, and since our plans have changed, there's not much between us and high voltage. Well, nothing except... Yeah, that's right, we're doing subchapters today. Not to be confused with polytetrafluoroethylene, polyethylene is the first plastic we'll make today, and yes, there are more we're making, because polyethylene is a key component for high voltage machine holes and circuit parts, and oh god, is it a chemistry nightmare. It is used in so many essential crafts, so it's not just good enough to make it once, it needs to be automatic and it needs to be fast. Our first step to polyethylene is plain old ethylene, which we can make in a ton of different ways, but my favorite is to make a sideways EBF that the nerds call a pyrolyze oven. If we fill this guy up with water and biochaff, it'll make a ton of buckets of biomass, which is important, but biomass needs infinite biological material, so it's a pretty good deal that the large farms we have access to will just make us sugarcane for free, forever, money back guarantee, 0% APR down payment, and we can then compress the infinite sugarcane into infinite plant balls, and macerate our infinite balls into infinite biochaff, and we've got our biomass infinitely a-flowing. But how do we turn biomass biomass into ethylene? Well, there's a middleman. We'll need everyone's favorite volatile, flammable liquid, ethanol, which we can get by simply distilling our biomass. But ethanol, while a fun way to spend the weekend, isn't ethylene, and thankfully, we're only one step away. Kind of. Remember sulfuric acid from last episode? We need it. Lots of it. And it's time to automate the process. We'll need to fully automate our oxygen, but I plan to do that later today, so for now, I'm just gonna move the sulfur and oxygen manually. Don't, type a mean comment, we'll get to it. That being said, it's actually the same lengthy process as before, but this time at medium voltage for speed and with much larger buffers of resources. And speaking of resources, these videos take a long time to make, and although I don't have a sponsor today, I do have a Patreon that you can find down in the description to help me do things like eating and making these videos for you guys. And who knows, maybe there's gonna be a world download there in the future, I don't know, winkety winkety, but consider supporting. And by mixing our ethanol and sulfuric acid, we get our delicious ethylene and a nasty byproduct of some diluted acid, which I couldn't care less about, so I try to make a system with Ender.io to filter it out into a nullifier, but setting the fluid filters crashed my game. Wait, when did I last save? Did it autosave before I did all my machines? Did I just lose hours of machine processing and engineering? Did I just corrupt my world? It crashed again. Oh, no, okay, unrelated. Cool, all right, time to set the filter. Uh-oh. Okay, so it looks like Ender.io is feeling a little bit feisty, and unfortunately that makes my only method of moving fluids filtered Gregtech pumps. Well, at least I can filter them without crashing my game. With that, I can inject some oxygen into the ethylene to finally create polyethylene, which I both store in a large fluid cell and process into polyethylene sheets inside of a fluid solidifier, because those are its two most useful forms. We can now make our very first high voltage circuits and machines, but it's clear we'll need to progress to cheaper circuits. And lo and behold, polyethylene unlocks the first of the SMD components, ultra efficient versions of circuit crafting parts like capacitors and resistors, usually crafting half a stack at a time or more. In order to make and use them though, we'll need an MV circuit engraver and an HV assembler. Thankfully, due to our prep earlier, we have the means to make both of these behemoth machines and all the needed parts to power them. SMD components, however, take some new fancy schmancy resources like tantalum, a metal that requires us to make diamond meshes? Well, anyways, diamond meshes come after iron meshes and need the HV assembler to make them. And though they're pretty expensive, they're also pretty sparkly and give us tasty new materials like tantalite, which can be further processed into tantalum dust, which doesn't even need to be smelted into the EBF. What a guy! What does need to be smelted in the EBF, however, is a new alloy, the ferrite zinc compound. But with both that and tantalum in my hands, I can make 4 stacks of inductors, basically for free. Oh my god, I love SMD components. To make the diodes, we need platinum, and nope, I'm not doing that today. Nope. So the last SMD resource that we're looking for is polyvinyl chloride, our second plastic of the day, or PVC, which actually uses the ethylene we're producing, but it also needs chlorine, which it isn't something we've automated. In fact, we don't really have a lot automated, including oxygen, which we're now out of, and so we have found ourselves at the great wall of Gregtech, the moment in any playthrough where any player realizes they need to stop, turn around, take a good look at their base, and realize... Thankfully though, in Gregtech, there's always a way, and right now we're about to solve our oxygen problem in a big way using topaz. Now that we have stainless steel accessible, we can make RF-powered sieves that will automatically sieve for us in a really compact space and automatically output into a drawer network that can hold thousands of resources. But as a side note, it was really slow, so I just replaced it with a deployer later, so never mind that. I even begin the process of connecting it to our ME network, including our sand production for the kinetic sieves, so that we can automatically access all of our resources and send them around. So now, with our automatic sand hooked up to everywhere, and the automatic sieve resources hooked up to everywhere, we can make processing the topaz really easy. I have the topaz ore sent into forge hammers to turn them into impure dusts, then have those dusts washed and electrolyzed, and between the regular and blue topaz electrolysis, we produce enormous amounts of oxygen, hydrogen, fluorine, aluminum, and silicon, all of which are essential to our playthrough, and get plugged directly into our ME system to access and send around for future crafting, which is exactly what we do to the oxygen, sending it automatically to our polyethylene and sulfuric acid machine. But not before running into the same issue with Ender.io filters crashing the game, and this time, I couldn't even get back into my world, so as a Hail Mary, I just updated Ender.io, and it worked. It even fixed the issue. I could just use it now. Okay. Well, we can now much more confidently make some polyvinyl chloride by electrolyzing some leftover salt into chlorine and combining it with ethylene and then oxygen. It's not automatic yet, but for now it doesn't have to be. Not only can we now make even more SMD components, but we now have access to the amazing plastic circuit boards that make the final tier LV and MV circuits, as well as the much cheaper tier 2 HV circuits. Our new circuits are now insanely cheap compared to before, and now that we have the HV materials needed, we can finally push towards polytetrafluoroethylene, and we nearly have all the required ingredients. Nearly is the key word, though. The final two chemicals we'll need to synthesize the ever-important plastic is methane and chlorine, neither of which we have. There are loads of complicated and expensive paths to automating these two integral resources, but I go for magic plants. Yeah, they Gregified mystical agriculture. Yeah, that's not a joke. For PTFE, we need chloroform, the mixture of chlorine and methane, which we'll get from growing it from magical I do this for my job, do you know that? Well, in any case, to get these magical means of productions, we're going to need a mythical fuel known as Inferium Essence, and we'll need a lot of it. So thankfully, there's a multi-block that we have access to that can just straight up duplicate it. Despite the fact that it costs a lot of steel, invar, and aluminum, we've got a decent backlog of all that stuff, so we can just build it right now. But before using it to duplicate Inferium, we need Inferium. Thankfully, it's a somewhat simple mixture of beryllium from emerald ore processing and phosphorus dust, which I have no idea why I had on hand, but I did. By placing just one Inferium into the Essence duplicator, it gets to work, and overclocked to high voltage speeds, it runs really fast, which is great because we have to centrifuge the Inferium into its 4 base essences before we can start making seeds, and honestly, we need a lot of these things. The recipe takes forever and has terrible output rates. So while that goes on, we should probably prepare to actually process our eventual magic seeds. So we'll need HV emitters to craft mystical greenhouses, and those greedy little emitters wants an Eye of Ender. And since there's no nether to speak of, Eyes of Ender are a bit more of a process to acquire. We'll need to combine sulfur and carbon in a high voltage chemical reactor to produce blaze powder, which gets melted into liquid blaze. Then we'll need to bathe an ender pearl at high voltage power inside of the liquid blaze to actually make Eyes of Ender, and then soon after, the emitters and the mystical greenhouse are ours, and we can process our seeds infinitely with water and Inferium fuel present. To make the seeds, we compress 16 of a base essence into an essence seed, which I do for all of them: water, air, earth, and fire, which means I can grow even more essences to craft 16 wood essences to make wood seeds, and that took an hour. But finally, we can grow water essence in the mystical greenhouse and use an essence burner to turn it into salt water, which can be processed into salt and then chlorine. And by growing wood essence in the mystical greenhouse, we can essence burn that into rubber logs and centrifuge them into methane. The setup I have right now is pretty ugly, but thankfully, with a snap of my fingers, I've magically made it off camera even better. Infinite, automatic, and kind of sleek if you ask me. Now, the chlorine line goes way faster than the methane line, but there are better methane production lines later in progression, so I don't really care. And honestly, I think this means we can finally make... We'll need to combine fluorine and hydrogen to make hydrofluoric acid, chlorine and methane to make chloroform, and then chloroform and hydrofluoric acid to make tetrafluoroethylene. We'll also make a ton of hydrochloric acid byproduct, which I'm gonna keep because it is so majorly useful in the long run. With tetrafluoroethylene, all we have to do is add some oxygen to the relationship to make it poly, and finally, we have access to the king of chemistry, the plastics of all plastics, polytetrafluoroethylene! With it, we can make the PTFE sheets and ingots that can craft amazing multi-blocks. The large chemical reactor, which has the power to simplify almost every chemical recipe. For instance, instead of sulfuric acid being a 3-step process requiring oxygen and sulfur and water, we can just directly craft it from sulfur and water. Couldn't be easier. But I'd really like to run these at high voltage power, and I'm really tired of overclocking MV energy hatches, so let's get ourselves some high voltage hatches, eh? We'll need a new circuit wafer type, and thus a new lens, but it's a bit of a process to get there, so we're gonna go through it together. It can't be made from gemstones. Instead, we have to form glass dust into a Gregtech glass pane and lay that into a clear glass lens, but we have to dye it, and for some reason we can't use regular dye, so after extracting regular dumb dye from our flowers, we have to combine it with sulfuric acid and salt to make, I don't know, better dye, but that is what we can use in a high voltage chemical bath, and it has to be high voltage, to dye glass orange. okay. But hey, it works, and it has the power to engrave LPIC wafers, but these babies won't cut in a lowly MV cutter, no, so the grind isn't over yet. As you all know, cutters require some new esoteric alloy, and the high voltage one wants blue steel, and this thing sucks. The blue steel alloy is literally made up of 4 other alloys: rose gold steel, black bronze, and brass. And black bronze, by the way, is also made up of other alloys. So this micromanaging takes way too long, but finally we have ourselves a handful of blue steel dust that will cook right on up inside of an EBF into the 4 blue steel we need to make our buzzsaw. And now, finally, we have access to amazing chemical power, as well as amazing it's not cutting. That's weird. Circuit settings are correct. I've got distilling fluid in it. Surely that doesn't mean... I hate the clean room, and we're not doing it. The clean room. I hate the clean room.